biting wind sweeps through the cobblestone square. Villagers gather, their faces alight with curiosity and judgment, as a figure is led to a heavy wooden frame. The stocks, simple beams of oak, yet symbols of humiliation feared across medieval Europe, wait to clamp shut on wrists and ankles. This was not a place for bloodletting or execution. It was a theater of disgrace, a punishment that attacked reputation as much as flesh. Welcome to Dark Era Echoes. Today we journey into the shadowed world of stocks, nudity, and public shame, where the line between justice and cruelty blurred under the weight of spectacle. Across medieval towns and early modern villages, punishments that exposed the body and spirit shaped social order and moral control. Far from harmless slapstick, these practices were tools of authority, crafted to leave marks on memory, if not always on skin. Public humiliation has ancient roots. The Romans placed offenders on display, their misdeeds proclaimed aloud, but it was in the Middle Ages that shame became a structured weapon. In bustling markets and churchyards, communities set up fixed devices, stocks, pillories, whipping posts, not only to restrain but to display. The wooden stocks were low to the ground, immobilizing ankles so culprits sat awkwardly, often forced to endure jeers or thrown refuse. The pillory, standing taller, locked head and hands so the punished faced their neighbors eye to eye. Both devices relied on exposure, inviting a crowd to participate in justice. Nudity heightened the ordeal. Complete or partial disrobing stripped offenders of dignity, leaving them vulnerable not only to cold or sun but to the gaze of onlookers. In a society where clothing signaled rank and virtue, being bared, even to the waist, signaled degradation. For women, the stakes were sharper. Modesty was bound to moral worth, and to see a woman's body made public was, to contemporaries, an extension of her crime. This is why civic codes often prescribe that female offenders accused of disorder, slander, or moral lapses be paraded or set in stocks with garments torn or loosened, a calculated breach of privacy designed to warn others. One of the most notorious instruments was the pillory in the heart of London's Cheapside, its stone base stained by centuries of ridicule. Offenders there might endure hours in the rain, their faces spattered with eggs or spoiled vegetables hurled by passers-by. Records speak of bakers cheating customers or liars spreading dangerous gossip, but also of men and women who dared challenge authority. For them, the pillory's cruelty was twofold: the discomfort of confinement and the unpredictable violence of a crowd freed from restraint. Stocks and pillories were not confined to capital cities. Parish records from France, Germany, and England describe village greens dotted with these devices, always placed where traffic was thickest, near the church door, the fountain, or the market cross. Publicity was essential. Punishment without an audience risked losing its sting. That is why some sentences specified market day, when crowds would swell. The community itself became part of the machinery, their mockery lending force to the law. Shame punishments also adapted to crimes. A dishonest merchant might be locked up with the very goods he adulterated. False measures hanging round his neck, sour wine spilling at his feet. A quarrelsome neighbor accused of scolding could be gagged with a bridle-like device, her head fixed so she could not speak, while onlookers laughed or frowned. These punishments were performances, moral dramas meant to correct by wounding pride. But there were limits, or at least debates. Medieval jurists and clerics argued about the balance between discipline and cruelty. Some warned that exposing too much risked inflaming sin rather than quelling it. Others defended harsh shame as a necessary curb on disorder. Town councils often issued ordinances controlling what could be thrown at people in stocks, fearing stones or knives might turn a chastisement into a lynching. Yet even with regulations, accidents and deaths occurred, a grim reminder that humiliation could slide into lethal violence. Gender shaped every aspect of this story. Women in many towns were more likely to be punished for offenses linked to speech, sexuality, or propriety. Scolding, slander, illicit relationships, or selling ale without license. Authorities often prescribed punishments that emphasized bodily exposure, from being set barefoot in the square to being tied to a post with skirts pinned high enough to cause embarrassment. Such measures reflected a culture that policed women's voices and appearance as part of social stability. Men, too, feared the stocks, though their punishments tended to stress ridicule over nakedness. A drunkard might awake with sore legs from a night in the village stocks, his shame compounded by dawn traffic. A petty thief might be pilloried with a sign declaring his crime, an indelible photograph in the collective memory long before cameras existed. Yet the impact on women carried a heavier moral charge. Their honor, once damaged, could shadow them for life. Religious overtones infused these punishments. The public square often stood steps from a church porch, reminding spectators that shame had a moral dimension. Some sermons urged parishioners to see punishment as correction, not vengeance, but the line was thin. A bustling marketplace offered temptations to cruelty. Children mimicked insults, traders paused to jeer, and sometimes mobs escalated to violence. The punished person, trapped and defenseless, embodied disorder tamed by authority, yet also exposed the fragility of justice when crowds claimed a role in inflicting pain. Even monarchs and nobles occasionally used public shaming to make examples. Chronicles recount how Henry VIII ordered traders to stand in the pillory for fraud, while continental rulers employed it to discipline rebellious writers or corrupt officials. But the spectacle remained most potent at the level of villages and towns, where neighbors watched neighbors, reinforcing invisible borders of conduct. By the late Middle Ages, some critics began questioning whether such punishments truly reformed. Humanist scholars in the Renaissance called for more dignified penalties, and emerging legal codes experimented with fines or imprisonment instead. Yet stocks lingered for centuries, a stubborn emblem of communal discipline. In some rural corners, they survived into the 18th and even 19th centuries, their weathered frames repurposed as benches or curiosities, silent witnesses to past humiliations. Imagine arriving in a medieval town on market day. Stalls overflow with produce and cloth, bells ring, and somewhere near the square stands a wooden structure. Empty, for now. But by noon, a culprit will be led there. Sentence read aloud as villagers pause mid-bargain. The punishment is not hidden behind walls. It is embedded in daily life. Public shaming depended on choreography. The march to the site, the reading of offenses, the locking of limbs, and the waiting hours, each stage magnifying disgrace. Officials played their roles carefully. Constables or beadles escorted the offender, sometimes accompanied by drummers or criers announcing the crime. Documentation from Flemish and English towns' records set phrases. For lying tongues, for dishonest trade, for public mischief. Such words framed the offense as communal harm, justifying the ordeal. Crowds were unpredictable partners. Some watched gravely, understanding the moral lesson. Others heckled or pelted the punished with refuse. Eggs, mud, and spoiled vegetables were common missiles, but filth or stones were officially banned in many places, though enforcement varied. Chronicles describe tragic episodes when taunting turned to assault, leaving victims injured or dead before their term expired. These dangers underline how public punishment sat on a razor's edge between lawful correction and mob justice. Humiliation could also be symbolic. A forger might wear the false coins he minted. A gossip might have an emblem tied round her neck. In parts of Germany, women accused of unruly speech sometimes endured the shammask or shame mask, a metal helmet with grotesque features meant to mock their supposed vice. Though less physically damaging than flogging, these contraptions targeted identity, forcing wearers to internalize scorn. The place itself amplified punishment. Stocks were positioned where people gathered. At church gates after Mass, in front of guild halls, or beside markets where merchants shouted prices. The punished person became an unwilling performer, framed by the architecture of civic life. Bells might summon witnesses, and sometimes musicians were hired to draw attention. Even silence could wound, as neighbors passed without greeting, treating the seated figure as less than human. Civic records suggest that humiliation was gendered even in staging. Women accused of disorderly conduct might be placed sitting, skirts pinned to ensure exposure of legs or feet, while men were often made to stand, emphasizing endurance. These gestures reflected assumptions about propriety and strength, embedding social hierarchies into punishment itself. Religious ritual often closed the scene. Some sentences required offenders to ask forgiveness before clergy or kneel at a church door after release, acknowledging moral debt as well as legal penalty. Others demanded public confession, words recited to cleanse a tarnished reputation. Yet scars of memory could remain long after formal reconciliation. As Europe moved toward centralized justice in the 16th and 17th centuries, debates grew louder about the ethics of public shame. Philosophers warned that cruelty corrupted spectators as much as culprits. Enlightenment thinkers like Cesare Beccaria argued for proportionate penalties and the dignity of all persons, even lawbreakers. Still, many towns clung to stocks and pillories, reluctant to lose their visible reminder of authority. By the 18th century, shifting tastes in justice, favoring prisons, fines, or transportation, began to erode these spectacles. But echoes linger today. Modern media sometimes mimics the pillory's dynamics, turning scandal or error into viral punishment. Social networks amplify disgrace with a speed medieval criers could only dream of. Though no one is bound in oak beams, the hunger to witness and judge remains powerful. What can we learn from the long history of stocks, nudity, and public shame? First, that punishment is never just about crime. It reflects values, fears, and the desire for order. Medieval communities saw honor as fragile, reputation as treasure, and disgrace as contagious. They used shame to restore balance, believing that exposure could cauterize wrongdoing. Yet they also risked injustice, cruelty, and harm to those least able to defend themselves. Second, these practices remind us how law depends on performance. The theater of punishment, its props, audiences, scripts, shaped meaning as much as statutes did. To sit in stocks was not only to suffer discomfort but to be written into a story of vice and correction, a narrative enforced by neighbors' stares. Finally, understanding this past invites reflection on our own appetite for spectacle. Public judgment can enlighten or destroy, heal or humiliate. As we scroll through scandals or comment on others' mistakes, we might pause to recall the medieval square, the pillory's shadow, and the lesson that justice, stripped of mercy, can resemble torture. From the wind-scoured plazas of medieval Europe to today's digital forums, shame remains a potent force. The wooden stocks may have rotted away, but their logic endures in every headline or hashtag that delights in another's downfall. To study these devices is to see more than wood and iron. It is to glimpse how societies define belonging and betrayal, dignity and disgrace. So next time you pass a weathered set of stocks preserved in a town museum or displayed on a village green, imagine the lives once fixed in those frames. Their faces a mixture of anger, regret, or resignation. They remind us that justice has a history, and that compassion is as necessary as order in the stories we tell about wrongdoing.